Hi, my name is Nic Malcomson. Is the secret to the good life eudaimonic well-being? We'll just wait for the slides to catch up. If this was an interactive session, there'll be some rules, but since it's not, we can skip them. So before we start, what is the good life? What is well-being? How do we live life well? And is this a psychological or a philosophical question, or both? You might want to reflect for a moment on what is your version of the good life. How did you go about answering that question? What kind of evidence or knowledge system or theory of knowledge do you use to arrive at it? Was it just conditioned, or did you think about it philosophically? Or have you researched various elements using empirical science? We'll revisit this later in the talk. So eudaimonic well-being with 3 L's. So to begin to give this a definition, we'll start with some of its historical roots. So eudaimonia is a very important term in Greek philosophy. It's used by Plato as he rewrites Socrates, by Plato in his later works, Aristotle, Epicurus, and the Stoics. And they all have views on what is eudaimonia. So I'm going to quote quite heavily from a Wikipedia article on eudaimonia. It's a particularly good article, and it'd be really great to know who actually wrote it so I could reference them properly. But I highly recommend the article. So, the article says, in Aristotle's work, eudaimonia was, based on older Greek tradition, used as the term for the highest human good. And so it is the aim of practical philosophy, including ethics and political philosophy, to consider and also experience what it really is and how it can be achieved. So the highest human good. Clearly this is a highly aspirational state. If we look at the etymology or the origin of the word eudaimonia, eu means good, and daimon is related to some kind of demon or spirit, either like sort of a guardian spirit, and perhaps that it means you have a good guardian spirit, or more aspirationally, and I think more relevant way, is that you might become a good spirit. So Aristotle, apparently both in the Nicomachean Ethics, which I pronounced wrong, and the Eudaimonian Ethics, refers to eudaimonia. So in outline for Aristotle, eudaimonia involves activity, exhibiting virtue, from aret, sometimes translated as excellence, in accordance with reason. Again, this is taken from the Wikipedia article. So it's not just a sort of an idle state or an ideal state, it's very much a practical state involving activity and virtue. Now virtue in Greek philosophy isn't quite the same way that we relate to the word virtue, which is probably by default more of a kind of Judeo-Christian or particularly Christian notion of virtue. But virtue in Greek philosophy often refers to more something like a kind of a strength. So one of your strengths might be that you're physically strong or that you're beautiful. But it's using these talents in the service of reason, in the service of wisdom of some kind. So while emphasizing the importance of the rational aspect of the psyche, Aristotle does not ignore the importance of other goods, such as friends, wealth, and power in life, that is eudaimonic. So for him, it's not just a sort of a state of mind. He also believes that you can't really have this experience of eudaimonia unless you have various external factors. So I believe that if you had a major loss in your family, if you lost your family, if you lost all your wealth, the external factors, he believes it would be difficult to experience eudaimonia. So it's interesting, there are a number of different conceptions of eudaimonia and how to arrive at it within Greek philosophy. And for example, Epicurus, it seems that he has a more hedonistic theory of how to live life, which is based on the notion of maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. But it's not a simplistic notion, it's also a notion of longer-term pleasure over shorter-term pleasure, which gives it a more eudaimonic angle as well. So jumping forwards a little bit, it seems that eudaimonia sort of had a resurrection in the 20th century. And again, quoting from Wikipedia, interest in the concept of eudaimonia and ancient ethical theory more generally enjoyed a revival in the 20th century. G.E.M. Anscombe, in her article Modern Moral Philosophy, 1958, argued that duty-based conceptions of morality are conceptually incoherent, for they are based on the idea of a law without a lawgiver. So I guess this is referring to, in the time, if one takes on a religious belief, the lawgiver is God, or Moses, and the answer to how do we live life is clearly answered. There are a set of instructions, a set of laws. In Judaism, 613 laws to guide one about how to live life. So the question is, if one doesn't have that foundation, if there is no lawgiver, how does one work out how to live life? So returning to the article, Anscombe recommends a return to the eudaimonistic ethical theories of the ancients, particularly Aristotle, which ground morality in the interests and well-being of human moral agents, and can do so without appealing to any such lawgiver. So we can see again, the hedonistic version is, for example, utilitarianism, maximizing of happiness for the greatest number. But it's interesting, what would a eudaimonistic ethical theory look like? But clearly, it's in the experience and the well-being, as it says, of human moral agents. So this is really interesting, and a huge domain to think about. So in modern psychology, sort of in the 60s and 70s, models of eudaimonia in psychology emerged from early work on self-actualization and the means of its accomplishment by researchers such as Erikson, Allport, and Maslow. So let's say that in plain English. So in the 60s and 70s, there was humanistic psychology. There was an interest in self-actualization, becoming the best you can be. I remember when I was a kid being taught some terms like IFTAP, which was an individuated, fully functioning individual. So, but clearly this is very much about becoming the most that you can be. The positive psychology, starting around 2000, initially had a notion of well-being, which was really slightly circular and based on some fairly simple questionnaires. These questionnaires were satisfaction with life, plus, which were sort of simple questions about, have you reached the place where you want to be in life? Are you satisfied with your life? Plus, positive and negative effects, feelings of pleasure and pain. And these would be a simple questionnaire that asked you in the last week or month, which positive emotions, which negative emotions have you experienced? And then we then do a tally of positive emotion minus negative emotion. At the same time, these kind of measures also became the definition of well-being. They became the definition of happiness. So in a rather circular way, happiness and well-being were defined as of what was measuring it. But was that sufficient? Did that really capture the whole notion of well-being? Is feeling good and feeling that you've got what you want in life sufficient to encapsulate the whole notion of well-being? So Dr. Ilona Boniwell, who wrote a very good book called Positive Psychology in a Nutshell, she also brought positive psychology very much to the UK and started the first masters in positive psychology in Europe. She says this in Positive Psychology in a Nutshell: is happiness enough for a good life? So as defined as by these questionnaires. This question is becoming increasingly prominent in positive psychology. Is feeling good an adequate measure of someone's quality of life? Philosophy dealt with this subject long before psychology existed. Can somebody be truly fulfilled without knowing what he or she is living for? What the point is, the meaning of one's existence? Is it possible to be truly well without moving a finger to change something in oneself, without growing and developing as a person? This is what is missing from the current mainstream theories of well-being, the notions of growth, self-actualization and meaning. The current theories of well-being seem to give a rather bare, one-sided picture. So, and this, we're telling this as if it's a sort of a historical narrative, but in fact, these dates are actually jumping around the place. But Karl Reif, building on eudaimonic ideas developed by the humanistic psychologists, created an integrated 6-factor model of psychological or eudaimonic well-being, 1995. So the 6 factors are autonomy, personal growth, self-acceptance, purpose in life, environmental mastery, and positive relations with others. So we see here there's a notion of autonomy, of choosing, the personal growth, so clearly conceptualizing how one might want to be different and how one might want to grow. Self-acceptance, which is about recognizing one's strengths and one's weaknesses and being able to be with those. Purpose in life. Environmental mastery is about having a sort of a grip on one's conditions in the sense of being able to handle both work and other conditions around one. And positive relations with others speaks for itself. So this seems quite a rich and interesting model, and clearly much more than just feeling good. Personal growth can be painful, can be difficult. Purpose in life can entail an awful lot of struggle. So slightly later, 2 researchers, Ryan and Deschi, came up with self-determination theory, saying, well, actually, this sense of eudaimonic well-being can actually be reduced down to 3 factors rather than 6. These would be autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So autonomy, again, is the need to choose what one's doing, being an agent of one's own life. This is taken from Bonnewell again. Competence, the need to feel confident in doing what one is doing. Relatedness, the need to have human connections that are close and secure while still respecting autonomy and facilitating competence. I'm not sure particularly whether it's 3 or 6. I think I like the 6. I like elements of the 6. I certainly like things like personal growth and purpose in life. But clearly there's much in common there with autonomy and environmental mastery and positive relations with others. But I think this begins to give us a sense of what a eudaimonic well-being means in positive psychology. So it's beyond the sort of just the emotional aspect of feeling good and feeling satisfied, but it's having these richer components. Autonomy, choosing freely, deciding to grow, deciding to increase competence, managing relations with others, purpose in life. So you see these are rich, interesting models, and I don't think it matters too much if it's 3 or 6 factors. Martin Seligman, the person who really founded positive psychology, certainly in its 21st century incarnation, had 2 kind of models of well-being. The first was his authentic happiness model, in which he distinguished 3 types of kind of routes to well-being. The first is the pleasurable life, which refers to the kind of emotional well-being that we were talking about. The second is the good or the engaged life, which really refers to the work of Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi and his work on flow. So flow is really the state characterized by high challenge and high skill, where one begins to lose a sense of time and one is very much in it. So classic examples are something like rock climbing, perhaps writing a book, even giving a talk. But this is the sense of the challenge is slightly higher than one's existing skill, and was very much and it's goal focused and was very much drawn into that experience. And these experiences are, apart from being clearly very engaging and certainly pleasurable in a slightly non-conscious way, they can also help us grow and develop our skills. And then, for example, in this you could think about, children's education. It's very much, it's always good to have the skill slightly higher to make sure it's engaging. If it's too low, things are boring. If it's too high, people might feel rather helpless and overwhelmed. And the third element is the meaningful life. So again, it's a purpose which is larger than oneself. It's been sort of transcendent, it's been connected to a cause that's bigger. Later on, he then added 2 additional components of good relationships and accomplishment, achievement. So to him, the good life and the meaningful life are both eudaimonic. This is his later model. Positive emotion or pleasure, engagement, relationships, meaning and accomplishment. So Bonniwell in her book, she does this great diagram to kind of show us, well, what is under the umbrella of eudaimonia. So we see psychological well-being, rights theory, self-determination theory, Malcomson, authentic happiness. So, these are rich theories, they're interesting theories, and there's quite a lot going on under there, and certainly a lot more than just feeling good, so that's kind of, inspiring. But do we have a problem? So according to Bonniwell, she says, oops, we have a problem. I wonder if you notice a little problem with eudaimonic well-being. It's a mess. Eudaimonic well-being is not just an umbrella concept for many vaguely related theories, it's a pot in which anything that is not related to pleasure is mixed up. So let's take a look inside this pot once again. Some authors define eudaimonia as actualization of human potential, Waterman, while others associate it with frequent experiences of flow states, which extends behind. Other commonly used definitions include realizing one's true nature / true self, so personal growth, meaning, and the totality of the 6 components of rife psychological well-being. Seligman defines eudaimonia as both flow and meaning. Can somebody please tell me what eudaimonic well-being actually is? So, again, this is Lona Bonniwell, nicely summing up this situation. And one of the questions, that really come back at the beginning to, what is the good life? I guess there's an epistemological question. There's a question of knowledge, and how do we go about answering this question? How do you go about answering the question of what is the good life? Is it a scientific question? Is it a philosophical question? Is it that we're expecting to run some experiments and we're going to pop out a single model that's going to capture the good life? Or does this, it's also interesting that humanity has always been asking these questions, from the Greek philosophers till now. People have always been asking these questions, and it does both this mess and also this eternal questioning. Does it tell us something? Does it tell us something interesting about the human mind, about the human condition? Something useful about eudaimonic well-being? So in this section, I've had a go at trying to make sense for myself of this rather complex mess in the realm of eudaimonic well-being. And I've done it for myself by looking at a theory called trimodal theory from Stevens from the Open University. And what he noticed is that there are many different, what seem to be competing theories in psychology, different competing perspectives. They seem to have different angles on psychology, they seem to have different methods of study, they seem to believe that there are different ways of going about accruing knowledge, different forms of epistemology. So, in his trimodal theory, he tries to make sense of this and make a comprehensive framework. So what he says is we've got 3 main layers within human psychology. We have the biological or neurophysiological layer, we have the symbolic layer, and the reflexive. So the biological is clearly low level, very low level kind of cognitive processing and other kinds of functioning. The symbolic for him is really almost the conditioning of, if you think of a conditioning of a child as brought into language, brought into a culture, brought into a society, brought into ways of behaving, both sort of normatively within the society and also within the family. He calls this the symbolic. It's really the layer of how we get to see the world and how we get to represent and respond at that layer. And for him, the reflexive layer is the sort of higher cognitive and consciousness functioning, where we get to reflect on our more automatic responses, and where we get to think about different ways of doing things. And Csikszentmihalyi talks about this as well, and he talks about it in terms of autotelic motivation. So telos is goal, and auto is self, so it's sort of a self-choosing goal. And what he says is that consciousness has this amazing ability to put a pause between an automatic response either coming from our biology or coming from our kind of conditioning, and to be able to reflect on those responses and to come up with alternatives. And these are then become self-chosen goals, autotelic goal motivations. And for him, these have a certain intrinsic motivational quality that we find once we choose our own goals and our own way of doing things, this becomes motivating in and of itself. If we go back to well-being again, so that the biological, we clearly we're wired by evolution to have fairly obvious pleasures: eating, sleeping, sex, all that kind of obvious stuff. The symbolic, we're maybe brought up in systems of reward and punishment, whether it's getting a gold star at school or being held in detention, or it could be more extrinsic things, the world of advertising and aspiring to the nice house and the big car or whatever it is. But these might be sort of more related to extrinsic motivations, more external motivations. And then the reflexive, this is really the layer, in my mind, the layer of the eudaimonic well-being. For me, the whole basis of, if we looked at Reich's model of autonomy, or both models, self-determination theory as well, they start with autonomy, this ability to choose. And again, that seems to be very related to autonomic motivation, that we get to pause, we get to choose, we get to see what option we want to go for. So this whole, and personal growth is really about, reflecting on, that conscious ability to see, how do I currently do things, and how would I like to do it differently? So there's a creativity there, and this reflective process. So for me, the eudaimonic is very much this reflexive layer, and the hedonic seems to be more at the biological layer. So just waiting for the slides to progress. So the other way I kind of want to make sense of this mess in the realm of eudaimonic well-being, or the mess in general around what is well-being, and then there's a really big question: how do we live life? Particularly psychologically, how do we live life? At some level, we might be expecting that we should get rid of this mess, that somehow the positive psychology is an immature science, and someday soon we're just going to sort this out, and it's all going to be very clear. And in my thinking, I think this is there's something interesting about the mess, that it's an important quality of the mind, an important quality of eudaimonia. So let me explain. So if one thinks about the space of life, it's full of a huge range of interactions. And one way one can think of this, you can divide the main domains of life into 5 categories. And I take this from Jonathan Porritt's book, Capitalism as if the Earth Matters, where he defines a capital as any resource that brings a return. He says there are 5 domains of capital. So we have natural capital, ecological capital, we have financial capital, we have human capital, which is our psychology and being a human being, social capital, and manufactured or technological capital. So you can think of these 5 major life domains. And then you can think of the individual, or the family, or the group, the organization, the society within this space. And if you drop into that, this human ability to create and to intervene, we end up in this immensely dynamic space of creation, of trying things, of intervening, our little interventions having unforeseen consequences, which we then try and respond to, and which also become part of who we are. So if you think of something simple, the advent of writing and paper. I had a professor a long time ago who used to talk about the extended mind, a professor called Andy Clark. That often we think of our psychology, of our mind being just in our head, but actually it's distributed. How much of our thinking could we do without pen and paper, without books, and now without computers? So somehow Google is part of our thinking and part of our cognitive capacities, and we rely on it, and it's very much part of how we function. So, and you could think about online dating or porn, or all these really powerful things that have strong impacts on the mind. These are novel combinations of things which some have foreseen and some have unforeseen consequences. So, as we're trying to figure out how do we live well, it seems that we're almost in an infinite loop of dynamic interactions. And so to think there's going to be a simple answer to how do we live well, and even psychologically, as we use different parts of our mind and different parts of our mind interact with our environment, it's a dynamic and complex space. But somehow grappling with this space is the zone of eudaimonia. It's the space of applying our reason, our intelligence, and our talents to making sense of this space. And there's something enjoyable and exciting about doing that. And get back to the idea of eudaimonia, of good spirit. It's that we become perhaps a better spirit we become a higher being. Slightly woolly language, but there's something aspirational there. So at this point, I'm gonna jump slightly to a slightly different direction. They say that the history of Western thought can be seen as a struggle between Athens and Jerusalem. So we've had some ancient Greek thinking. So I'm just going to balance things out a little bit with something coming more from Jerusalem. So I'm going to take some stuff from Judaism, some material I learned a long time ago. But I think there's some quite interesting concepts there that can enrich our notion of eudaimonia and of good life. So in Judaism, they say often in Western thinking, or that we think that the opposite of pleasure is pain. And I guess that's, that goes along with hedonistic thinking, that very much the goal is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. But in Judaism, they say the opposite of pleasure is comfort. And the idea embedded in this is that real pleasure takes effort. That one needs to invest and one needs to struggle, and yeah. So this also would relate to Csikszentmihalyi High's notion of flow. That if you want to have a flow experience, then one's got to get oneself in the place where one is in a high skill, high challenge situation, a high challenge, high skill situation. It takes something to start climbing a mountain, or to write a book, or to give a talk, or to enter into any of these states. It really takes something. So just a differentiator between hedonic well-being and sort of just and feeling good versus these eudaimonic states seems to be that there's a significant investment of effort may be required. Another interesting idea is called the 5 levels of pleasure, which you can look up under Rabbi Noach Weinberg. And the idea here is that there's a sort of a hierarchy of pleasures. So the first one is physical, which we've kind of talked about before, evolutionarily given physical pleasures. And the other interesting idea from this model is something called counterfeit pleasures. And counterfeit pleasures kind of give you a short-term reward, but may ultimately be destructive. So a counterfeit pleasure on the physical layer would be getting addicted to drinking, getting addicted to eating, which is ultimately destructive. So the next level up is relationship. So this might be, being married, being close to somebody, having a family, having a child. And the idea is that these layers are qualitatively different. So that the question goes, how much would you sell one of your children for, if you have one? And one's supposed to say, well, of course, no amount of money would I sell a child. And the idea is that there's a qualitative difference in pleasure between these two layers. And the next level up, meaning, the question would then be, well, when would you sacrifice a child? And so, for example, for a greater good. So imagine one's on an aeroplane, there are terrorists, they say, either give us the child or we're going to kill everybody. So perhaps in order to contribute to a greater good, one would give up the layer of relationship. I won't go into the levels of power and the infinite at this point, but clearly the counterfeit of power is very much the corruption of power. One can see how very famous historical examples of people taking power the wrong way, but clearly there's a pleasure associated with that. And the last one is the notion of infinite, which is the relationship with God. So, so we can relate these layers in many ways to Seligman's PERMA model. I'm not going to go through all of it now, but we can see obviously correlations with the levels of meaning, with the levels of relationship, the levels of positive emotion and pleasure. But what's also interesting about the model in Judaism is that they have a way often of trying to stack these pleasures and make them line up with each other. So rather than sort of having physical pleasure in one place and then coming home and being with one's family, the idea is to line these things up. So, so the idea, for example, on the Sabbath, there's physical pleasure in terms of there are meals and there's plenty of good things to eat. There's lots of relationships going on, so one's close to one's family, one invites guests, one's close to one's community. there's meaning, people going to the synagogue to pray and to think about sort of a higher purpose in life and to appreciate the sort of all that we have in life. So there's sort of a relationship to meaning. And those three things sort of sit on top of each other, so they're aligned with each other. Which somehow, I think, that's, you know, to synergize these things, I think, is a very powerful idea. So one thing you might want to think about is, if you look at your own life, if you look at how you get pleasure in these different levels, both the level of meaning, eudaimonia, in relationship, physically, and maybe perhaps in terms of power, and how to line those things up. So, for example, this talk was first given at Pub Psychology, and Pub Psychology, we're trying to line things up a little bit. So, obviously, it's the idea of a pub. So there's physical pleasure in terms of you can have a drink. Obviously, there's relationship in that we get to meet people and talk with people, and there's meaning in terms that we try and talk about interesting topics that will help you grow and develop. And that creates a feel good factor, a well-being factor, and hopefully a bit of a flourishing element to it. So that's a slight aside, but I hope it's sort of some practical thoughts that can bring some new thoughts around eudaimonia and well-being in general. So conclusions. Yeah, so firstly, this whole area of eudaimonic well-being is fascinating and it's complex, and that seems to be necessary part of eudaimonic well-being, or eudaimonia, is that it comes from this reflexive layer, this layer of consciousness where we get to think about and reflect on ourselves, and also to take action, intervene in the world, and change things and create new combinations, including new psychological combinations. And so, well-being and living well, these are complex domains that are necessarily messy, and that's almost the gift of this reflexive awareness, and is a necessary part of eudaimonia. The notion of autotelic motivation from Nic Malcomson, I think, very interesting. That we can pause on automatic responses and come up with something new, and that again is the whole area of eudaimonia. And for me, eudaimonia is very much it's the highest level. It's the king of the castle. It's the neocortex. It's the ability. It's the highest level of functioning that we can reassess and choose how to act. And we can have a go, and I say have a go at living life to the fullest. And of course, we don't know quite what the consequences will be of having a go. Something I've missed out, if you look at the Wikipedia article on eudaimonia, there's a very interesting section on parents and eudaimonia. And these are studies between parents and children, looking at to what degree do children take on eudaimonic activities. And it seems to be very much that if one's parents model eudaimonic activity, not just talk about it, but actually really do it, lead a life that is reflective and aspirational and based on growth, but then children find it much easier to take that on. And I would say my own mother was an amazing model of doing that, and so I'd like to thank her and acknowledge her for that. And also, it's how come I'm standing here today talking about eudaimonic well-being. So just in terms of references, I haven't put it on here, but the Wikipedia article on eudaimonia, really, really interesting. Elena Bonimell's book, Positive Psychology in a Nutshell, there's an updated 2012 version. Csikszentmihalyi, the idea of autotelic motivation comes from optimal experience, and you can see the other references there. The only one that's missing is Seligman 2012, Flourishing. So, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to be in touch with me, you can see my email address here. And thanks once again. Wishing you all the best.